Good evening, everyone. I'm Douglas Hill, co-director of Pasadena Photography Arts. Thank you for joining us. We would like to recognize the Tongva and the Chumash, who are the native people of these sacred lands we have come to know as Los Angeles. Forum is sponsored by Pasadena Photography Arts, a project of the nonprofit Emerge program at Fulcrum Arts. Our mission is to promote diverse photography projects by established and emerging photographers worldwide through in-person and virtual exhibitions. In addition, PPA is committed to sponsoring educational programs by accomplished photography professionals. To achieve the mission, PPA's ongoing programming includes Open Show Pasadena and PPA Forum. We're also in the process of developing new programs, so please stay tuned. Pasadena Photography Arts presents a monthly program here on Zoom. The forum alternates with Open Show each month. As a primarily volunteer organization, we have worked hard to keep the costs of these programs to a minimum, but there are expenses involved. We ask that you donate whatever you can by visiting our website, pasadenaphotographyarts.org, and clicking on one of the donate buttons. For those of you who have not experienced Open Show, it's an international platform now in 31 cities and 15 countries, designed to give photographers at all levels an opportunity to show and discuss their creative projects. If you would like to submit a project to Open Show, go to openshow.org, select Submit a Project, then scroll down to our venue. We are OS-Pasadena East LA. Since we began, we've helped over 150 photographers get their work in front of an audience, many of them for the first time. While we welcome your donations, we also want your feedback. If you have comments or suggestions, please at one of the addresses on our website. Of 42nd will be hosted by PPA advisors Justine Manesh and Roland Spatugan on the theme, A Story Worth Telling. Submissions will close on March 31st, that's Thursday. So get those submissions in. Underwriting one of our events is a great way to help out and get involved in what we're doing. Email us to find out how. You can follow and like us on Facebook and Instagram. During tonight's event, everyone will have the opportunity to type questions and comments into the chat box whenever you like. The event is also being recorded and will be made available on Pasadena Photography Arts YouTube channel. And now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce my fellow PPA advisor, Debe Arlook. Debe is an award-winning Los Angeles-based photographic artist. And let me see if I can. Spotlight Debe. There we go. She is a 2021 and 2020 Critical Mass finalist and a 2020 Photo LA Top 20 finalist. She exhibits internationally, having had work shown at the Lishui Art Museum in China, Photo Nostrum in Barcelona, and at the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, California. Her work has been shown at Rick Wester Fine Art in New York, the Griffin Museum of Photography. She's been shown at the San Diego Art Institute, A. Smith Gallery in Texas, and Louis Stern Fine Art here in Los Angeles. She has been featured in Louis de la Photographie, 112 Publishing, Rangefinder, Shots Magazine, and What Will You Remember? Debe is also a contributing editor for the Photo Book Journal. Ladies and gentlemen, Debe Arlook.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you all for being here tonight. We're so happy you're here. And I have to say, there's one new one I'm now showing with the Center for Fine Art Photography with Hamidah Glasgow that was juried by the wonderful Gordon Stettinius for 30 over 50. So yes, I hit the 60 mark and I am a grandmother. So I was able to submit this year. Again, thank you all so very much for being here. This is part 2 of exploring what's possible. It was many years ago that when I was showing some work that I realized I didn't want to just print it and have it on the wall. Like there had to be something more. And I didn't even know like what was that supposed to look like. This is before I started doing some deep dive into printing. And then just even with the idea of framing and context of the work, how would it be best to show the work? And I sort of did this, one question led to the next, and asking industry professionals where to go next. And I found that it just kept opening up one door after the other door. And about a year or so, I joined Pasadena Photography Arts and realized I had the opportunity to ask these questions to industry professionals and have this conversation. So that's what we're doing here today. I'm really happy again. This is our part 2 with award-winning photographers and industry leaders, as I mentioned. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, read their wonderful bios, and then we're going to go into a bit of a presentation. And at the end, Hamidah is going to drive us home with her perspective and the mark that she makes in the photo community. So with that, I'm going to begin with Kei Ito. And again, please write your questions on the side. We will probably get to them at the end versus in the middle, but write them down so that way you won't forget. And because we really want to hear from you and have that conversation. Last time we were so interested in what we were all saying that I didn't quite get your questions. So I would definitely want to do that this time. So Kei Ito is a visual artist working primarily with cameraless photography and installation, currently teaching at the International Center of Photography in New York City. He has been a BFA from, he has a BFA from Rochester Institute of Technology and an MFA from Maryland Institute College of Art. Ito addresses issues of deep intergenerational loss and connection as he explores the materiality and experimental processes of photography. His work, fundamentally rooted in the trauma and legacy passed down from his late grandfather, a survivor of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, meditates on the complexity of his identity and heritage through examining the past and current threats of nuclear disaster and his present status as a US immigrant. Ito has participated in artist residencies nationwide, including the studio at Mass MoCA, the Dennis Rousseau Fellowship at the Center for Fine Art Photography, and the Center for Photography at Woodstock. His internationally recognized solo and group exhibitions are published by the Washington Post, Hyperallergic, Be More Art, Art Maze Magazine, and BBC Culture and Art. His works are included in major institution collections, such as the Museum of Contemporary Photography, Norton Museum of Art, California Institute of Integral Studies, and the Candela Collection. May I present to you, Kei Ito.
Thank you so much. Let me share the screen for quick, if I remember how to do it. Do you see the screen?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm a visual artist living and working in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm currently teaching at International Center for Photography, as Debe said, as part of their continuous education faculty. Many of my work explores the theme of intergenerational trauma rooted in nuclear weapon and what it means for me to be in the United States as an immigrant and a third-generation A-bomb victim. My grandfather, Takeshi Ito, was a high school student when he witnessed the great tragedy that destroyed nearly everything in Hiroshima, as you can see him here. He survived the bombing, yet he lost many of his family members from the explosion and radiation poisoning. He later became a profound anti-nuclear activist to fight against the use of the nuclear weaponry throughout his life, until he too passed away when I was 9 years old. Many of my projects were inspired by the stories of the irradiated trauma, not only the suffering of my grandfather, but also many other people who have suffered from any nuclear-related issue worldwide. including a group of American nuclear weapon victims who were exposed to radiation during the testing of the nuclear weapon called downwinders. To create my project, I mainly utilize cameraless photography, which is instead of making imagery with camera, I use experimental darkroom technique or modified historical archive to create my artwork. This practice came to me when I realized if a camera is a tool that captures something that's in front of you, then how do I capture something invisible, such as radiation, trauma, memory, and the liminal space between life and death? My answer was to get rid of the camera and use the most basic and primitive component of photography, light and shadow. Many of my artwork transformed both art and non-art space alike. These spaces are turned into temporal memorials that then become a platform for the audience to explore social issues. They also stand as monuments dedicated to the losses suffered from the consequence of those issues and how it affects us even today. One of the things I hope to talk about it in today's discussion is something I've been working on with the Center for Fine Art Photography in Colorado and its director, Hamidah, who is also part of today's talk. It's one of the project I did is seen here using the projection, which is kind of like a new approach for my artistic practice, but it incorporate how do we make photograph into more three-dimensional installation projection. How do we bring it to actual world? And that's something I'm really interested in. And we are working on the project that might happen next year. But to summarize my practice, my artwork bridges these conflict and borders to create a collective and universal warning of today's nuclear tension. Overall, it's a message to pursue shared peace by examining the past and pointing out that even with this conflict, trauma affects all sides. And this is ironically more relevant today because of the Russian invading Ukraine and using the nuclear weapon as the part of the tool to trying to conquer, to threaten the world. So I'm happy to be here and thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kei. Yeah, I was thinking so much about, that you're creating this 3D work and how relevant this discussion is of the nuclear threat. How would you say that you're bringing that more, like, even though you knew this is an ongoing thing, were you sort of surprised that it came up maybe even sooner now with this threat that's happening?
I definitely did feel that when the North Korea and US conflict happened a few years back and like realized that I knew the nuclear issue was something that exists today, but that was the time that I felt the most. I felt like, oh, because I live in Baltimore, which is right next to DC, and it takes about 30 minutes for ICBM from any of the world to strike, say, DC. Obviously, there's a defensive thing, but most likely, like the nuclear annihilation could happen really soon. And one big thing I really get inspired by is the Doomsday Clock, which is published by Bolton of Atomic Scientists. It's a collective scientists who get together in DC and publish a metaphysical clock. And if it goes to the midnight, then that represents the nuclear annihilation or global climate that can sustain and human annihilation. So midnight is the human extinction. And they published every year how far to the midnight. And it's been 100 seconds to the midnight, which is extremely, extremely close to midnight. So like, that's not just how we see on the news, but the scientists agreed that this idea of the human extinction is looming over us, not just a nuclear issue, but global climate, like so many things considered to be part of this doomsday clock. So I think we tend to ignore these things, but I think art is the one that we can create as a warning, instead of like, I'm not trying to tell people that this is the fact, rather I'm just using it as questioning the audience that, hey, can we think about, like what we stand right now. And when we recognize that, then we can work for better future. So that's something I think about a lot.
I appreciate you doing so. And from my perspective, I didn't have the lineage where we were, looking at my family and seeing this direct threat. And it always seems, here we are, this superpower, and we keep further away, and yet it's not so far. And you have this stronger connection, like I'm saying. So it is something I think we'll be talking a lot about as well tonight. This idea of the role of art, and this literally the 3D way of expressing these important issues. So thank you for that tonight. Thank you. Our next panelist is Shawn Bush. Lens-based artist Shawn Bush grew up in Detroit, Michigan, a city whose civic history and geographic location have profoundly influenced how he thinks about physical space with American socio-political and socioeconomic landscapes. As a result, his photographs and collages are responsive to overbuilt systems, failing icons, and collapsing mythologies. Bush earned an MFA from Rhode Island School of Design and a BA from Columbia College, Chicago. He's included in the 2022 Silver List, as by the way is Kei, a 21 recipient of the Aperture Creator Labs Photo Fund, a 2021 Wyoming Arts Council Fellow, and a 2017 Lens Scratch Student Prize winner. His debut monograph, A Golden State, won the handmade category at the 2016 Lucy Photo Prize and is included in several prestigious museum collections across the globe. His second monograph, Between Gods and Animals, was published by Void in Athens, Greece in fall 2021. Bush's work has been shown in various arts and culture publications. He's the founder of Deus Books and assistant professor of photography at Casper College. I was able to meet Shawn. He was teaching a photo book making class, and that was a very exciting thing. I learned I was way over my head. I look forward to looking over my files. I created one little something, and I have to say, I look forward to when I have time to dedicate more. So Shawn, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. The book is quite the journey, as you know, Debbie. Let me start. Oops. All right. Can we see the screen here?
You're good.
All right. So thank you again for having me. I want to kind of start by just mentioning, like Kei and like everybody here, I'm really interested in the history of the medium of photography and building on that, I would say. And that was a big part of my impetus to start Deus Books, which was to take some of the aspects of book production. As I've worked as a designer, I worked for different publishers prior to starting Deus, and take some of those hurdles and work with those the best that I can with the skill sets that I have. So within the book format, Deus Books, and let me get this flip through here. We're looking at the most recent Deus title. Deus Books is concerned with uplifting the voices of artists that have traditionally been left within the periphery of the art world, and also very heavily at the intersection of material concept and form. We're very, very interested in the materiality of the photograph, like Kei. and how we can, within the book format, communicate intent through materiality. The photo book, unlike the screens that we are kind of staring at right now, in the many versions of that, is one of the only places that we were truly kind of allowed to touch and to feel an image and maybe feel the tactileness of that. And I find great importance in the sense of touch within this space, even though I'd like to say that I'm interested in all 5 senses within the book format. I have yet to explore taste. Touch is my primary concern, to inform really an understanding of the body of work, but really an understanding of the artist's practice as well. I hope that when a viewer, whether that's somebody that picked up a title at a library, at a school, at a collection, at an artist talk, or purchased one directly through Deus, is able to kind of have a tether between them and the artist. I hope that it feels kind of almost like an umbilical cord, I would say, between artist, publisher, and the object. What we just saw previously that flipped through was the same book that we're seeing here, the most recent title by Tara Kranick. And this object here is made up of a bound text block, which I have sitting right here with me, which, if you've encountered a book, which most of us have, a text block would be kind of the interior or the guts of the book. In this book, the text block is then placed into a slipcase, and the slipcase is a very kind of raw shipping material, actually, that's employed, and that contrasts the tension of the paper, which is very, very smooth and very soft and delicate, which again kind of suggests the intimacy within this space. So whenever you hold a Deus book, I really hope that as soon as it touches your hand, as soon as it touches your body, that you really feel that intimacy. And also the lack of the structure. So most books do have some sort of cover material. This book in itself, the design and the content, it has no structure to it. So when it falls into your hand, it feels like this very, very intimate experience. And prior to starting Deus, I worked as a designer and was making books for other artists and photographers, nationally and internationally. And one of the things that I was continually discontent with was the limitations that were placed on design based on material, which most of the time was indicative of budget, because photo books cost a lot of money to produce. So one thing that I've done with Deus is fund some of this commercial production and balance that with handmade production. So what we see here is some of the production for the slipcases for Tara's book that I just showed, that I did to facilitate the object as it needed to be, because it was far outside of what we could actually fund, or what I could actually fund. And Deus books also is a little bit different than perhaps some of the other publishers, where I fully fund all of the production for book production, which can be very, very expensive. So I'm trying to kind of take that cost off the artist and promote the best work possible in the best way possible. The slides that we see here are from Zora Murph. This is the first Deus title, At No Point in Between. This book also explores the materiality of the book space and the photograph within the text block itself, but also from the cover. So when you hold this book, the cover itself has this fox leather on it that feels very skin-like, and the front and the rear of the book are stamped extra hard, actually, with a foil stamp with entry and exit wounds, so it feels like you're holding a body. So it becomes, again, this very, very intimate experience right from the get-go. You don't have to see the images. You have a strong understanding of what is to come just from holding the object. In order to make this book happen, again, I had to create many things on my own. Because of this attention to detail and the subsequent handmade elements, Deus is only able to produce maybe 1 or 2 books a year. Since the inception in 2019, I've only been able to produce 2 books, and those are the 2 that we are viewing right now. Hopefully in the future we will be able to produce more books, but again, it is a very labor-intensive process, and it's also something that I find great value in. So I want to continue to make books in this manner, and try to not have them fully made, perhaps by a machine, and kind of remove the intimacy of that object. Very quickly, I just want to mention the next few Deus titles. So although only 2 books have been released so far, there are a few new titles in the pipeline that I'm very excited about. The first is Aspen Maze, which will be a very tactile book, just like the rest of the books, but it will also employ a different binding method than a sewn binding, which was employed in Zora and Tara's book. Hirovi Slavonek's book, a few weeks in May, Portrait of American Psyche. This book is going to truly be amazing, and I really think light the world on fire. And then Medium of Exchange by Shada Soleimani, which is going to be a fantastic book once again. So I'm very excited about what I do. I'm passionate about what I do, and I do it for a reason, and that is so that as a viewer, you can really feel that you have an understanding and maybe a conversation with the artist that perhaps you wouldn't have access to through a mass-produced object. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn. Yeah, you end it with this passion that you have for the books. I have my selection. I've got Tara's book here. When I opened it, the sense that I have from holding this object makes it so much more. And I was sharing earlier that Shawn has such an appreciation for the craft, and and it's not just his work. He showed me some other books that are just fascinating, and I said to him, I don't even know how to describe how this book is made and what this spine. He says, yeah, it's just a couple of staples, and there's just so much going on here. And I don't know, this one's called American Origami, and I don't know if you could see how it lays so very differently. And we're going to talk to Shawn more about that. But Shawn, what I want to ask you is, as you mentioned, all of the senses as you're making these books, what is it that leads you to choose your artists and the design? Like, where do you go first? How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question. And choosing artists is very difficult. I have to really be invested in the practice and understand that they understand the material of the photograph, and that we both value the same spaces, essentially. I've been in circumstances where I've started to work with artists and had to stop working with artists because we don't, as we begin to work, it's clear that we don't share those same values. So that's also maybe part of the selectiveness or the intimacy of Deus is that I can't say yes to too many people. One, because I'm hand making these books. One thing I didn't kind of mention is when I'm making these books, it's about a half hour, maybe an hour of work into every single title that goes into your library. And you're essentially getting it at the same price point as a MacBook that's produced in 5,000 copies. So the worth for material and viewer experience, I think, is really important. But it's also something I just feel when I talk to an artist, and when I see an artist's work, I I can maybe form that understanding myself, and see that they're interested in the same kind of things, not necessarily concepts, but more so the material and how the work is presented. That is kind of key for me. So Zora, I saw his work and I saw his installations. That was a really big part of it for me, was seeing how he played with material. I was really more interested with how he played with space and material and brick and different things than photographs, actually, because that, for me, that kind of helps build the house for the photographs, which is the book. And the same with Tara, and the same with Aspen, and every single artist that I'm working with is the same, in the sense that they really work with space in a very, very specific manner that's very hyper specific to their practice and their work, so that it allows me a lot of territory to work off of, so that we can make something unique, so that it's not essentially, or maybe it feels like you're flipping through the greatest hits on your website or your phone or something. Yeah. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
And there's so much more we'll dive into it. I want everyone to know that behind you is where the magic is made.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And you, yes. And also, you know, much like when you know a producer that's making movies, or a producer who makes a certain sound with music, if you get a Deus book, you're going to get an amazing sound. You're going to get an amazing object. So you don't even have to think about it, and you know you're going to have something special.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jeff Phillips. Jeff is a photographer and media artist living and working in Chicago. He's interested in exploring alternatives to traditional forms of photographic presentation. His work reveals a range of interests, including vernacular photography, documentary storytelling, the built environment, and pop culture, often presented through handmade photozines, digital projection, software interfaces, interactive installations, and public art projections. Jeff has lectured at Columbia College Chicago, School of Art Institute of Chicago, and regularly presents workshops in zine making and digital projection. He holds an MA in photography and integrated media and a BA and a BA in applied technology from DePaul University in Chicago. I also have the pleasure of taking a photozine class. You can see I'm interested in the topic, and Jeff is so generous with his students, and he'll tell you later as well. You can go on his website. He shares things very freely. He has a great way of exploring work in ways that maybe we have not imagined. So Jeff, take it away. Share your magic.
Thanks, Debbie. I appreciate that, and really thrilled to be in the group of folks that are talking tonight. It's just been an amazing opportunity to sit and listen to each of you talk. I'm going to share my screen real quickly. For the next 90 minutes, I'm going to talk about, I'm kidding. I do have a lot, and we were joking a little bit earlier before we got started of how fast I would probably end up talking to get through this, but I want to share some really exciting things that I find interesting and useful in your own photography or visual arts practice. And one of the reasons why, let me back up and say, I've been doing photography for 30 plus years. I worked as a commercial photographer back in the 90s for digital cameras, blah, blah, blah. I pursued a fine art career for some time. And I realized at some point that for me today, especially, that long haul to the wall is what I call it, that journey to the gallery, as we all envision, was very hard, very difficult. I've been in over 50 group and solo shows over the years, but never really was able to gain traction with representation or any of those things. What I realized a few years ago, about 5 years ago, is I really don't, for me personally, I don't care about that. I'm a classically trained photographer and darkroom printer, so I love the print on the wall, the way that it punches you in the chest and takes away your breath. But I found that my work and many others' work that I was talking to photographers, there were other ways to get your work out into the world. So in a long-winded way, what I'm setting up here is I'm going to share with you some of the ways that I found that you can I can show my work in a more meaningful context, in places and in spaces where it makes more sense, where the audience is probably more appropriate for what I'm doing. And I'm not here to say there's, abandon the gallery. That is absolutely not true. In Chicago, we had 5 major galleries until about 3 years ago. Now we have 2. And so the shrinking market for the shrinking opportunity was what some of what drove me. So I'm going to start right now, get my face off your computer, and I will go through this as quickly as possible. As you know, Debbie said, I do zines. I do zine workshops, and I'm really fascinated with them because of what they are as a medium to get your work out in the world. This is not a book. When I'm in the presence of folks like Shawn or Candor Arts here in Chicago, other folks that make really awesome books, I very, very pointed in describing that this is a very different approach to making a book-like object. It's a zine, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is it's a handmade book, generally speaking, using materials you have around. You can get as sophisticated or creative as you want. You can make them 1 at a time or 10 at a time or 100 at a time. But the whole idea, the spirit of it is it's an independent book object made by an independent single artist, not a team of folks, which sometimes are required to produce a photo book of the caliber that you saw tonight. But anyway, what I'm here to talk about is a couple of different ways that I have found that it's really, really satisfying to get your work out in the world, and hoping that you might derive some inspiration from that as well. So I'm going to move on here. This is a zine that I made a couple of years ago, and there's humor that runs through my work. So I've always been inspired by Irwin, Josephson, Meyerowitz, Martin Parr, Friedland Reven, and then Julie Blockman's Chicago photographer. Just this amazing humor that runs through all this work. And so what I found was that the commercial gallery market, or really book publishers, are not interested in the kinds of work and the sense of humor that I have. So I left because it hides the tears was a solution to a problem I had, whereas I had dozens of projects that I could not finish. I didn't have enough images to have a show or this or that. And actually my website you can get to by going to halffullbuckets.com, because that's really what all my projects are. But the zine format is perfect for a show or a body of work you're doing that you can quickly get out there, get it done. You need 10, 12 images, not 30 to satisfy, to have enough for a show, and so forth. So this is really a conversation with the reader. It starts with this pretext of I laugh because, and then the rest of them are finishing the sentence, because we watched the warm sun disappear right before our very phones. And when I showed this to a few people at first, they were like, Jeff, the text and the photos, it's not conventional. I know it's not, but it's really popular. And I love this book. It got all that work out into the world. And I've printed 3 editions of 100 so far. And so it's inexpensive to do. Here's some other examples. This is an educator in New York. He used to live in Chicago, Joe Wilcox. He made a deal with he's a high school teacher, and he made a deal with his students that if they wanted to use the hall pass to go to the restroom, or they wanted to go to their locker, they had to take this Canon 8-1 camera with film in it and make 1 picture in order to use that as a hall pass. And they came back with just amazing images. They would make a zine at the end of the year, and they would sell it, and the money would be donated to charity. So the zine itself, I'm showing you this just to give you some examples of how it can be. It can be a multi-fold piece. It can have multiple signatures. This is a story. This is a zine about reading teeth, which is similar to reading palms. And it's bound with, it opens like a mouth, and it's bound with dental floss. So that just gives you the idea of one of the ways that zines work differently than you might think. This is a piece of trash. This is Sarah Smith in New York. She tells her students to go out and find trash, which they scan and use as bisects the covers of a zine. And so you can see it's just kind of limitless. Chris Graves, I don't know if Chris calls this a zine or not, but it's done on newsprint. It's low cost. It has the spirit of a zine. It's big and beautiful when you open it. The subject matter is appropriate. When you open it, it's a big letter sheet of newspaper type material, which is in your face. Even Alex Soth did it. Now here's an example of, this is Elliot Dudit and Jared Ragland. They did this real quickly. in 24 hours. It's an edition of 50 books. It really feels like a real book, but they destroyed 2 printers in the process. So these are some things to keep in mind too, that quantity, that limited amount. I'm really going to have to move through this quickly. I'm going to leave this up here in case you watch the video later. You'll be able to see these are some ideas that you may be able to use to spark some inspiration about what you might make a zine out of. I'm also interested in digital projection. And digital projection to me is fascinating because number one, it's very affordable these days. With everybody moving to laser projectors and with the old school bulb projectors, you can buy a professional projector for very little, just under a few $100s, and you can light a building with it. Not a big building, but I did this project here. I did a residency in a military school. I didn't choose the school, and I had all this reservations about it. But when I got there, I learned that I was very wrong. So I spent 2 years at this school photographing these kids, and then COVID hit. So I had no way to show this work anywhere, at a gallery or a local library. That was the idea. So what I did instead was we commandeered 8 classrooms on the top floor of a Chicago high school, and there was no students in there at the time. So I was able to project into the windows and share these images of this empty building and show images of what those students would have been like a year prior, pre-COVID, and the whole neighborhood that's around this school could finally see what happens inside this school. Okay. I've got some other examples here during COVID where I couldn't go out, nobody was doing anything. So I was projecting through my window, I was photographing domestic objects and using 3 projectors to share this with the outside world. And people would gather every night, not because it was great work, but because it was something to look at. And this is motion. I inverted some bulbs and I photographed them. And it was just a visually interesting thing. It doesn't have much meaning, except that we were all trapped inside. But you can see what it looks like here kind of as it goes. And again, it's very easy to do. It's inexpensive and so forth. I did another body of work on death metal mosh pits, but not because I like or don't like death metal music, because there's a religious reference here. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian family, and there was a lot of, I love this music, but it was also a lot of references, similar behaviors to what I saw in the Baptist church that I was in the youth, and this kind of enthusiasm overwhelming for their God. And so there was no uptake on this in anywhere either, because it looked, everybody that I showed it to, reviewers and gallerists, was like, that's rock photography. And I mean, it's not rock photography. I'm trying to do something more with it. So a zine is where this headed to. I'm going to keep on moving here. Here's what it looks like inside when you project from your house outside to the world. And this is what I used, video footage from the zine, the mosh pit, one of the mosh pit works I did, and I projected it out into the world, and it was pretty much a hit every night. Of course, that was COVID. So let me go ahead here a little bit more. So there's other artists that have been doing it too. Sig Harvey, for example, Colleen Plum is amazing. She's been projecting for years. These projectors are inexpensive, and in the right space can be really effective of getting your work out in the world. And it's not illegal to project on any surface of any building anywhere, as long as you're not shining in a window or blinding somebody if they're driving or something like that. You mentioned, Debbie, found photography or the vernacular stuff. I love this too. I have a project that I found 1,000 Kodachrome slides some years ago. And I thought to myself, like, all the found photographs I collect, what am I going to do with this stuff? I mean, you don't have found photography exhibitions very often. But this one, I decided, this was 1,000 Kodachrome slides. They were unidentified, the couple that was traveling the world in the 50s. So I put it on Facebook, and the response was amazing. It was national news within 2 weeks, not because it's my work, but because it's a project I managed. And the identities of these folks were found in about 2.5 weeks. The point of all this is that I was shared with thousands of people. There was major shows that did get into galleries, and it's currently installed in the St. Louis airport, where these couple we found out were from. And most meaningful to me was the way that people interacted with these images online. This is a post from somebody on Facebook who said, I have no children. I have often wondered if anyone will ever care that I was here on planet Earth. I can relate to Edna. Their name was Harry and Edna. And we didn't know if they had children or not, but this woman, this person opened up and just bared her soul to the world. And this photograph was the impetus of that. And that really moves me and shows the power of vernacular photography. So I used the technology and the intersection of technology of a background in both photography and technology. So when I have this in a gallery show, I had an ectographic projector and the conventional prints, as well as an iPad, so that we can see all those images at the same time and think about the way we share, create, and make images and photographs differently today than we did in the time of when the photographs were originally made. It also leads to other areas of discussion and discovery. This is an ad from the very ship they were on, the very cruise they were on in the 50s that they took. And I matched these up against this one ship is the Matson. One ship, I matched these up with the actual pictures of the experience that people would have there. So again, that thread of humor, not anything terribly meaningful, but it does help us think about how things have changed. One thing that hasn't changed is the BS of advertising. So you can see this again, the difference between the balloons. So I know, Debbie, I'm over. Can I take just a couple more minutes if that's okay?
You're fine. Please continue.
Okay, another example this is an image of Edna that I found, and we didn't know her name at the time or where this was, but obviously it's noted there. With technology today, and the reason I love intersecting visual arts and photography with technology is the fact that I could go and plug these cities into Google Street View, and then immediately find the modern day version of where she was standing exactly. So this is the Kodachrome version from 1955. This is the real version from Google Street View today. You can see the sign is different, but this is amazing to me to be able to make those connections between the past, the history of the photography or the photograph, and the current day, and have photographs also. So project I'm working on right now is Ed Ruscha has this book, Every Building Along the Sunset Strip. It's this accordion fold thing he had back in the day. So I'm recreating that book using Google Street View images just for the fun of it, because I think it's hilarious. Public billboards, public art, installation art like this. I did a project, this is about 2 weeks after George Floyd was murdered. And so I worked with another artist, a graffiti artist from the south side of Chicago. And we gathered 15 young students, high school students that were arts inclined. And we had them, we gave them 2 keywords, hope and unity for Chicago. And we came up with a design for this, I keep calling it a billboard. What I mean is this installation where each young student would take a camera and make photographs of their own neighborhood, their own community, and then we'd make space for them on this giant set of plywood boards, which then would be reattached to the bank, and they really killed it. I was blown away, and it was one of the most moving days I've ever had. I've had young people come up to me and say, "This is Jeff. This is the first time I've ever felt like an artist and a photographer." So this is the kind of work that doesn't cost much money. It gets the work out there. You're helping people, you're interacting, you're learning. And so this is another way that I'm concentrating on getting that work out there, is have public murals like this. We've done 3 so far. And there's no shortage of schools that, especially now that we're emerging from all the regulations that don't have children that are interested and available to go experience it with you. And I want to end this way. There are so many things that I really, if you think about it, I'm always looking for places where you can put work that's meaningful. Again, it's all about context. It's not just because you can put it there. The fence, the Photoville is the fence. You've probably seen this if you've been to any of the festivals. New Orleans has the fence every year. This is an example of one. I'm not taking away from the value they provide and all the services they do to make this and curate the work and to take care of it and clean it. But the fence, as you know, it's a 1/4 mile long, generally speaking, vinyl banner with images on it and artist information. That vinyl banner right there can be made at any print shop or anything like that. So open your mind to kinds of things in the public space where you can use new materials, zine making, projection on buildings, in spaces, and find work that really works well in that context. And I think for me, it's been tremendously satisfying, and it's elevated my practice quite a bit. That's all I have.
Are you sure?
Oh, no, I'm not. There's so much more.
I think you're going to show us, because
I don't want
we want to see more. That's the thing. It's hard to put it all in such a small
I
bit,
know, I
but
know.
it's
Sorry.
encouraging and it's inspiring, Jeff. You know what you're doing. You know, it's like you're showing us how to do things on a shoestring, how to self-publish, how to get the work out there without having to think that it's got to be at a minimum of $30,000 to make a book. And you're showing us, you know, with limited resources and with limited expenses, how we can do that. And it's inspiring. I'm repeating myself, but it's inspiring. Of all of these tactics, I would say, or the mediums you're using for the medium of photography, what would you say in terms of the fit? You know, like everything has to have a reason, right? Why you're going to use the vinyl, why are you going to do the projection? Does one come to mind for you in terms of that fit that was just so perfect when it came to you? Like you had this great aha moment.
Well, I do. There's two, and I'll be brief, I promise. But I've broken that promise before. So the projection at Phoenix Military Academy was perfect just because of the timing. I've done that in several other local high schools since then. I've just gone and made images or taken images from other folks that have been photographing those schools, and then set up projection units. And the schools themselves love it. The students love it. So those are a great fit. The other one was, of course, the found photography project called Lost and Found, or Is This Your Mother on Facebook. And that was great because of all the things that unfolded and all the opportunities that it led to after that. And it's really not even my work. It's me managing a project and providing insight and recommendations and making decisions about how to show it and reacting to people online and cultivating that interest. So both of those are examples. The zine itself in general, though, is an amazing format. Almost anybody that has an idea can benefit from the exercise of at least trying to make a zine. It's not a photo book, but there are some amazing, beautiful zines out there that are significant pieces of work that are sold and kept. Colleges, universities all around the country, around the world, have zine archives. And there's University of Chicago here in my town regularly buys photo zines from artists. And so there is an interest from academia and from the pop culture market and even just collectors of photography themselves.
It teaches us as artists how to continue the conversation of the art, where it's going to be placed as opposed to just the framing. And maybe later
layout, sequencing,
all of it.
all
Exactly.
the stuff that you don't ever think goes into that can make a difference in a book.
Exactly. That time it's important to do that because it helps us to see the work so much more than just that image, how it then moves to exhibition, you know, with Hamidah and those next steps. And maybe later you can tell us about your chick magnet story.
And
we have a lot.
I have to add on there that there's a reason that I use that title.
We'll tell. Well, I know. Okay, I get it. Well, you're
okay.
fine. You're cool. You're cool. You're cool. Thank you.
Right.
So last but not least, I want to thank Hamidah and give her the beautiful introduction that she deserves. She's been the executive director and curator at the Center for Fine Art Photography in Fort Collins, Colorado since 2009. She holds a master's degree in humanities with a specialization in visual and gender studies and a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Hamidah is a co-founder of the Strange Fire Collection. Strange Fire Collection is a group of interdisciplinary art. I was going to get it right, and then I stumbled on it. Interdisciplinary artists, curators, and writers focused on work that engages with current social and political forces. They seek to create a venue for work that critically questions the dominant social hierarchy and are dedicated to highlighting work made by women, people of color, and queer and trans artists. She's one of the founding board members of the Colorado Committee of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And she continues to exhibit and nurture groundbreaking artists. Hamidah, this is me saying, Hamidah is a leader in the photo community. We're honored to have her here as a panelist for both part 1 and part 2 of this discussion. When I first had the idea, Hamidah was the first person I went to, and she said, yes, let's do this. And Hamidah, tell us, just give us some of your gems, because I always love to hear them And thank you for being here.
Thank you for the introduction. That was very, very kind, very sweet. It's interesting listening to everyone talk about their process and their work. For me, what I take away from what everyone just explained is that I think there's this prescribed way that people think that photography happens, that people think that photographers work a certain way, the end product looks a certain way, that it has to be this sort of prescribed way to fit into the photo world. And to a certain extent, that is true with some spaces. But I think that things have changed so much, and people are exploring way beyond that, the old days of the black frame with the print was matted in a white mat with a black frame. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Some work lives that way and it's perfect. But that's been going on for so long that people are pushing well beyond that into other realms. And that's so exciting. I like to say that, like, I'm embracing so many different ways that people are working at the same time, that I have to say probably that one of the most moving pieces, or some of the most moving pieces of work that I've ever seen, were these tiny little Claude Cahun and Marcel Moore prints in an exhibition in San Francisco. They were 4x6 drugstore prints, and they knocked my socks off. Like I was just blown away. But at the same time, now as we move into 2022, like so many years later, people are doing so many new things, and that's what's really exciting, is to be able to work with artists like Kei Ito, like in the last conversation we talked about Odette England's work, and the ways in which she's pushing the medium, and the ways in which we literally, she showed us how these wrinkled canvas, these canvases needed to be wrinkled and formed and then nailed to the wall so that they looked like the lick of a flame and the collapse of a structure after a fire. Like, and so I think it's really, it's for me, it's a lot about embracing who you are and not trying to follow the pack, because that's where the real work happens. Like that's where the magic is, both in life and in art, right? I mean, so for me, that's what's really exciting, is to be able to, like Shawn was saying, find those artists. You sort of get a sense of how you will work together, and what that relationship is going to be like. And sometimes you realize, ooh, that's not going to work, just like Shawn said, because it's a partnership when you're working at a deeper level. And so like Kei and I really, we met over a curated show for Strange Fire Collective that was at Milwaukee,
wasn't it?
Milwaukee Institute, MIAD, yes. But that was over email. But then Kei was selected as the Denis Rousseau Fellow for the center, and we, Kei is I have to say this, Kei is an amazing artist to work with as a director, as someone who loves to work with artists. He's so dedicated and so, he's like, well, let's make a meeting and let's do this. And what about that? And, really just open and easy to work with. And so past the fellowship, we were able to work with him to commission that video, which was spectacular. And now the show that he talked about as maybe happening next year. I'm not sure why the maybe got in there. Maybe his You're getting nervous. I don't know, but so we're doing a museum exhibition. It's a solo museum exhibition with Kei in 2022. It's in the spring of 2022. It's going to be spectacular, and it's just a delight to work with him. And that's one of the things about the center, is that, also going back to what Shawn talked about, and I think what Kei was talking about, we as an organization back in 2018 made the decision to change our model. And a lot of that was based on looking at what we were doing, realizing we were doing too much, and that we wanted to focus more on the quality rather than quantity. And that we wanted to focus on our relationships with artists. We wanted to be able to use our budgets to help artists realize their dreams. And so in this partnership, the partnerships that we have now, we're able to do that. So we were able to say to an artist, here's your space. This, how do you want to do this? How do you want to create? How is your work going to live in that space? And so to me, that's what's really exciting. But it's working at a different level. And people, I think, need to be at a certain level to do that kind of work. But like Jeff was saying, and I could listen to Jeff all night. Jeff is so fabulous. Like Jeff was saying, you can start anywhere, right? You can make projections, you can make zines, you can, actually, I just found your zine, the one that you were showing the other day. I had to pack up all my belongings. It's a long story. I had water damage in my house. And I found that. I was like, oh, I still have this. This is so great. But you can start at the beginning, right? You can start early on, not trying to do a prescribed way of doing things. Follow that little voice inside that says, well, what about this? Well, what about that? If you look at the center's website, and I'm probably gone over, but if you look at the center's website, you'll see we just also, we just showed the work of Christiane Riddle, and she created sculptures out of photo paper that are printed double-sided and then folded into the structure that becomes a wave that hangs from the ceiling, and these vessels. But those were made through a process of introspection and pulling the parts of herself as a person into her practice as an artist. And so I think in some ways that's what everyone was talking about, right? That sort of making the real stuff. But you can start anywhere is the other side of it too. Like you don't have to act, there's a lot of entry points into making work that doesn't fit the mold.
And she really, like, as we were talking about with the book making, every aspect goes into the sculpture she's making, from the thread to the color to the bending. And it is that I guess nurturing that we as artists must do, nurture the work to have it show, right, what it is that we're wanting to
but I
share
think
with.
it shouldn't be about showing. So, I mean, I think it needs to be about making the work, because you could work on something for a long time and it doesn't work out, but that doesn't mean it's a failure or a success, right? It means that you followed your instincts, you followed your artistic passion, and sometimes that's a success and sometimes it's not. If I believe that if you're making to show, you're on the wrong path. I believe you should be making to make, to create, to follow your artistic voice, to realize some question that you have about the world, to understand something about yourself, to, like, there's so many different ways. But if you're making to show, that's a different thing, in my opinion.
It's a great point. It's a great point, because we get lost, a lot of times as artists. What do? We make our work and we put it, we enter it to get shown. But you're right. It's coming back to that. Why do we make the work anyhow? I was at the Chico Hot Springs at reviews for charcoal books this week, and I was asked, well, why do you make your work? And my reason, why do I make work, is because I'm trying to figure things out, like for
Right.
myself. I'm just trying to figure out whatever questions that I have. And he said, that's why I make work. But so here's the big question. As an artist, who you just mentioned this great collaboration you have with Kei, right? And the relationship and how that works. And it's a big question. And it's kind of like, well, how does the artist get invited to the party? We all want to know, how do you get invited to the party? And that's the book party, it's the publishing party, it's the book party, it's the party.
I think it's the same way. It's being who you are, knowing who you are, exploring that, so that when you meet people that you want to work with, or that you think you might want to work with, because it's a two-way process, right? We're all colleagues. We are all equals. There is no, I don't believe in the hierarchy that I think a lot of people buy into. We're all colleagues. People can choose or to work with me or not work with me, depending on how they feel about me or my aesthetics, right? It's the same way with artists. So it's just about being yourself, following your passions, and then relationships. It's all about relationships. And then you sort of come together and work together, and it works or it doesn't. And I think that's, for me anyway, that's one of the myths that's in there with the doing things in a prescribed way, is that, especially now, right? Like in the past, there were gatekeepers. I mean, there was serious gatekeeping going on. And today, I'm sure that's still true if you're talking about museums and certain galleries and all of that. But it's also true that, with Instagram and like all the projections and all the things that other people were talking about, there's so many ways to generate like-minded people who appreciate your work and who you can reach out to. Mm-hmm. So I think that I think it's about relationships and real relationships.
I agree. And I appreciate you saying it. I think that really pulls it all together. There's the why we're making the work, and then the how. And how doesn't necessarily mean using materials. It's about relationships, and that makes everything go deeper, because there are these layers. And if you guys want to unmute, Jeff and Kei, if there's some have a little, if you'd like to. Yeah,
I actually wanted to add that. First, Hamidah, thank you for the kind words. And the reason why I used maybe was I didn't know we made a paper contract with the museum yet. So I just used the language. I didn't want to assume things. So sorry, I'm really excited about it. I hope it didn't come across as a dismissive or anything. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't. I thought maybe you were just concerned, but yeah, it's, we don't have a signed contract, but we've worked with them. This is since 2018, when we changed our model, this is our 4th solo museum show we've been able to offer artists. So,
yeah. So I just wanted to point that, and also like the one thing.
Actually, no, Kei will be the 5th. Brenda Biondo. We're showing Brenda Biondo's work, her abstract photography, the Legacy of Shadows, this spring, and then Kei will be the 5th solo museum show that we've offered since we changed our model in 2018. Sorry, did I interrupt you, Kei?
No. I just wanted to say, like, from my artist perspective, to talk about like how to be connected with the people is really be persistent. Like, me and Hamidah, we met through, even though we didn't exchange any kind of like a real conversation, we only met through artwork. But our history goes back for like, that show was in 2018, 19. Something like that, I think. Yeah. And so like she kind of knew me from that long of the time, and I associated with the Strange Fire collective a few times with exhibit or interview and stuff. And like, even though we never really had the direct connection, like there's a chance that Hamidah have seen my work throughout my journey of the artist. And I was just doing my thing, just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. And like, the one thing I would say is I am pretty determined with the subject and with the artwork and consistent. And I'm just, like, I'm a full-time artist. I'm just trying to go and go and go. And like people like Hamidah or like, this group right here is the kind of the way that I get to connect with the people. And it may not something come out right away, but maybe like 5 years later, 6 years later, something might happen collectively. And I think that's something we as an artist should remember. Don't think it as like it's a one-time thing. It always, art world is a small world. Like we need to be cherished, and we need to like cultivate what we have, and like help each other and stuff. I really do believe that. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
I would like to say one thing, and then I want other people to speak, but about the persistence. I don't know if this is appropriate, but I often think of it in some ways as like, it's sort of like dating, right? There are people that you just resonate with, and there are people that you just don't. And so I think persistence is good when it's someone that you resonate with, but if it's someone that you don't resonate with, it can be sort of like stalking. So I just want to say, not really, but you know what I mean?
I meant a persistent in the own practice way.
Oh, like, yeah. But I mean, I think,
right.
So I think you also have to read the signals, because there are times where people get it in their head that they're going to show in a certain place, and that place may not resonate with them. And so that persistence is not useful or helpful to anyone. And now I'm going to let Jeff speak more, or Shawn.
Well, we actually have a question. I just want to interject. And this is for Shawn. It says, is there a favorite paper you like printing on?
No, it's hard for me to say that. I mean, it depends what realm, I guess. If I'm making like an artist book, or if I'm making an inkjet book, that might be something different. But generally, the way that I approach book design is that the paper stock is going to be unique to whatever the content is. And sometimes what I usually do, when I approach a printer, is each printer has a different actual physical machine, so they know that machine very well, and the stocks that work well in that, and etc. I talk to them about what their kind of house stock would be, or whatever that they are very confident that they can reproduce imagery on, and then kind of take that information and then try to find maybe an analog to that, so that I can use that and again just make the book feel perhaps a little bit more unique, just through the sense of touch. So I wish I had a better answer, but I don't have just a steadfast answer for that.
Do you want to just mention a little bit about Tara's, and then what brought you to choose to select this work, and then the insert, of course, as well?
Yeah, so that stock, we were really interested in. I mean, it's a very intimate project for the artist, and projecting that intimacy through the materiality of the paper, and having it on a stock like Zora's, which was a bit thicker, maybe a bit more standard, like a photo book stock, where you don't see the image kind of bleed through, actually kind of took away from the viewing experience of that. So I have a whole kind of closet full of stocks and different samples and things that I get to close my eyes and feel and smell and do all those things. So usually what I do when I work with the artist is I get a short list of those, and then talk to the printer, and then kind of narrow that short list down, and then send samples to the artist so that we can kind of feel those out, and then print on them, and then continue that process.
So here's another question. I'm preparing a manuscript now, and I'm wondering about marketing. How many books should be in the first printing? How should I market the book and actually sell it? Of course, that's a lot, and quicker on the response.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. Usually when I approach this with anybody, it's kind of what your time, your effort, your love, and your pocketbook is limited to, because books can cost a lot of money. I think that a manuscript, just based off of my perception of a manuscript, would be mostly written text. So perhaps the financial obligation to produce 5, 10, 20, whatever one of those books wouldn't be as significant as a photo book. But I think it would be a great idea to produce a few of those and to kind of flip through that and get an idea of what that feels like as a book. But also, if it's text-based, perhaps, and I'm so intertwined in photography in the art book realm, perhaps you can send a digital version to potential publishers and other houses, so you don't have to put that financial or all that capital in initially, because it can be rather costly to produce a book, especially in a large edition, or 500 books or 1,000 books or whatever that is. Marketing and selling a book is a whole kind of different conversation. That's a lot of work. As Deus, that's part of what I do, and that's probably my least favorite job. But yeah, there's a lot to it. It depends. It really depends on what you want to do. You can sell, your mixtape out of your trunk, or you can, pay somebody to distribute that here and here. It just depends on, again, what your time investment is, what your financial investment is, how much love you have for the project, all of these things. And I would say it takes a lot more probably than we think to kind of get the book out after. And that's something I talk to a lot of people about, is what happens when I have 500 books in my closet, and how do I sell those? And 100 books a year is, if you do the math, is quite a bit. And I think it's great to be weary within the publishing space. I guess I would put it that way. And that's why I think zines are so great, is because, or any sort of printed matter, it doesn't have to be through a publisher, just to get your book out and just to make it. And that's one of the things I do too in all my workshops, is teach participants to make just a simple mock, because once you hold that mock, you're 99% of the way there. I can tell you that I just had my book published in an edition of 1,000 in fall, and I've looked at it twice. I probably looked at the mock more. And maybe that's the intimacy and, what I enjoy of this space. But yeah, I think there's a lot of options, and I think that just checking at your expectations, and being real with yourself and your audience, and all these really difficult questions is really important.
Thank you for that detailed answer, because there's so much you can get from it. And there are many questions, of course, to ask as we move along. I would ask a question to all of you. Is there a memorable, kind of asked a version of this last time, a memorable book, zine, exhibition, or just one image, just something that stood out that has inspired you as you make your work? Go ahead, Kei. Yep, please unmute and have at it.
Well, it's pretty clear, like, who I was most influenced by is he recently passed, the artist called Boltansky. And Christian Boltansky is, he's not a photographer, but he used mind image, like archive, a portraiture from a Holocaust to create kind of like a really large installation based. And I actually never seen his work in person because every single time the exhibit happened, I'm outside of the country or what. He's a French artist, but one of his artwork, No Man's Land, which is just a pile of clothing on the ground, huge pile, and a crane just comes down and pick it up and let it go. Just that, as simple as a form of that, but to me that became such a, it creates a mental image. And to me, like I have a funny tendency of like I think everything as a photography, even though some installation may not have any photographic element, but this idea of the clothes, pile of the clothes as a, kind of like aftermath of, record of the people who was there once. And to me, that's photography. It's archive. So like that installation influenced me as a photographer, and to extent become an installation artist. So like I have a really interesting way of like how I approach photography, and lots of these things came from Christian Boltansky's artwork. So I just wanted to throw it out. And I know it's a wacky, crazy answer, but
we never know where the inspiration is going to come from, and that
exactly.
makes a lot of sense because your work is 3D. Your work is much more than a photo framed on the wall, and that says, I think it says a lot about the artist. When they're doing it, I use the word layers, but I think it's more of a foundation and things that are built upon, and that's how we evolve. And what we're trying to share isn't black and white. There's so much to see, and literally when we say 3D, it's walking around and it's seeing the shadow it creates, it's the texture, it is an object, it is the smell, right? There's so much more. And Jeff, how about you? What influenced you?
Well, I was thinking a lot about this when you were talking, and I was just overwhelmed by the number of zines and handmade books that I see on a regular basis, and I was really struggling to find one that would be my all-time favorite. There's so many artists of all places and all parts, in all parts of the journey in their practice, and they're making different things. It's so hard to pull one out. They're just stretching the limits of what's possible with a handmade book approach. And a lot of that may have been to COVID, where we were all like forced to do things indoors and focus on handmade objects.
Then Jeff, who is your favorite photographer who makes photo book or make work in the book format?
So there's a professor of photography here in Chicago, Ame Bobby, and so I've known her for a long time. I'm part of Filter Photo in Chicago, and she is on our board. And she makes all kinds of crazy stuff, and she's really prolific in that area. She just loves making book objects, and she'll take a bunch of loose images and fold them and bind them with colored rubber bands, and then put them into a folder, and that and somehow it just works. There's some local artists here in Chicago, Matt Crowther. There's Nathan Pierce, who lives in Southern Illinois, who makes astounding books. It lives in the middle of nowhere. Rachel Banks is another young artist. She teaches in Kentucky, and she makes amazing work too, all with like spiral bound, puts them in a cool package, and but it's meaningful work. It all works together: the packaging, the presentation, the work, the words, the poetry. Sorry, that's all I got. There's so many more. There's so many more.
Fascinating.
It's like I can't even.
Who would like to go next? Is there something that had inspired you, like where you are now, Hamidah? Who would you say that stands out most for you in your mind? Whether it's an artist or a curator. You're muted. Oh, you're muted.
It's a tough question. I was thinking about the time when I remember being moved the most, was actually a Butoh performance. in Los Angeles many, many years ago, and I couldn't speak for 2 hours. I didn't want anyone to talk to me. I wanted to stay in this space that had been created by the dancers, by the performance art. Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Shawn?
completely, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, Kei,
Oh,
go
I was
ahead,
gonna
'cause we're
say,
just-
Buto. If no one, if someone who doesn't know what Buto is a Japanese origin, associated with the Flexus movement, kind of like a choreography that became really famous in, say, it's 80s, 90s. You would say, Hamidah?
I'm not sure.
But
I'm not
in
sure when it
that
started.
time since the Flexus movement, and it's very emotional. They sometimes say random words. It's very Dada, like it nonsensical, but in the same time, it's absolutely powerful, like gesture to do so, and it's really global. The language doesn't matter because like what they do is really, and I think that's what choreography trying to achieve all the time, like the body language that beyonds the literal language. And I think the Gutai really achieved that, something that's really powerful. Sorry, I just wanted to throw in the
I'm glad you did. And I saw you put in about Boltansky, and maybe if
yeah, that's
either of
that.
you has maybe the spelling, and then you can put that would be helpful. Oh, we've got it here, Buto Dance. Thank you so much. And I do want to ask Shawn his influence, but also Jeff, we have a request to see that grid that you had put up earlier. Somebody would probably like to take a screenshot of that. And maybe if you could sign it and send it to everybody in the zine, that would be extra helpful. So Shawn, if you want to share your influence.
I guess it depends on, there's always kind of the duality when I speak about my practice, if we're talking about my personal practice, or are we talking about Deus, and there's usually a lot of overlap within those two. For me as a publisher, I think the most important experience or influence I've had was during my graduate education at RISD. We had an amazing library, fantastic library, extremely beautiful building, but also above the library there was, or on the second floor, there was special collections, and across some special collections was the material lab. So what I could do, and what I quite often did, and when I taught a book class at RISD, my students did this. We would go to special collections and get to touch, to feel, and smell, and not taste. I wish I could taste them. But really get to interact on an intimate basis with these books that couldn't be held within the normal confines of the library, because the material was really fragile, or it was a small edition, or it was handmade, or et cetera, et cetera. And that really opened up my eyes to, again, how I could kind of, I've always loved photo books, how I could kind of take my love for that and then take my love for art and maybe kind of meld those two together, so that it wasn't, so I didn't feel like I was maybe reproducing photography books that had already been in existence. I was maybe building off of that. So that was
Makes sense.
a really big part of that. And I wish I could still go there. I really wish I could.
You remind me of my library of books that I buy because I love them and then have not had the time to read them. Like, I want to get a residency. I wish there was a residency where I could just take my books and read, go on walks and read and take notes, because it's important that it really is important to take that information in. and be able to experience it in different ways. And we're at the top of the hour. I just want to share one thing and then see if you guys each have a question, please to do it. But I just want to share, after like the first time I was able to travel after the lockdown, and I was able to go to New York. I had an exhibition, and I went to the Met, and I was there from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And my break for lunch was street photography in the middle. And I remember, and I met another artist, Ann Cornfield, and she's here tonight. And we had just met each other at that time. It was like consuming the senses, and it felt to me the five senses, even when I ate, because I felt like I was eating, drinking, smelling, seeing the art. And I got in the cab. I was late to my thing because I was loving what I was doing and couldn't leave. And I started to cry. And the reason I felt it was, when an artist makes work, going back to even what we're all saying, what Hamidah said when she was speaking in the beginning, is artists make, this is where we make the work from. And it comes through in all of our senses. And when it is done in the way of perfection, and that perfection doesn't need to mean literal perfection, but when it is translated through the hand, through the eye, through the mechanism, through the material, the viewer feels it. That's a success. That's success. And I'll always remember that moment because it was so beautiful, and I want to do it again. So again, please, I know we're at the top of the hour. If there are any quick, we're getting thank yous, and I appreciate it. And we thank you all for being here. If there's any last little something you want to share as you're going, please share it. If you guys, go ahead.
I just want to say really quickly, I put the Buto group that's in LA is called Body Weather Laboratory. I put the website in there. I highly recommend you go see them if you're anywhere near there. They are fantastic. Oguri is the main, is the lead dancer, and he'll take you to another planet.
Cool. You know what we're going to do? We're going to, of course, we'll have this. And when we send out, if you've signed up for Pasadena Photography Arts, we'll put it in our newsletter. So you'll have those links. Thank you all so very much. Thank you for wonderful panelists for being here. You put time and effort to doing it, and we're grateful. Our audience is grateful, and I want to thank the audience even for being here. We have so many Zooms and so many places that we can be, so we thank you for being here. And thank you also to the advisors. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. And remember, this will be recorded. If you missed anything, we will send that information as well. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, good night.